Muchas gracias, merci, grazie, des vidania. Buenas tardes, bonjour, buonasera, and other languages, because we speak other languages besides English, right? Yes. And so I'm going to introduce languages, 2 minutes, and innovation hubs and spaces for 13 minutes. So I have to squeeze both things at the same time due to time pressures. So let's see if we can begin. First of all, a brief introduction. I am an international consultant for 37 years. What a boring job. Visited 110 countries, worked for these boring institutions like the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, the monstrous European Union, on these contracts that are called IDIQ, or in Europe, framework contracts, or all these monstrosities of FRPs that we do in consortia. But that has led me, after several attempts working in 3 multinationals, one of them Booz Allen here, my first job after my MBA, then Pricewaterhouse, a monster franchised accounting and integrated firm, PwC, then A.T. Kearney, and finally I started my own company. My own company was up to 10 people, and I said it's too small, so I got to do open innovation, and I joined 10-Step Group, which is what you see there. It's kind of a franchise system, because the guy who founded it was from Coca-Cola Atlanta. Said, okay, I'll give you the syrup and you sell the bottles. And that's what we did. So we started and we franchised. And he disrupted a little bit the project management industry. Of course, I studied in Philadelphia and Wharton, so I knew the PMI. I had already joined. So I co-founded the PMI chapter, and I did all this stuff. And then when I found out that IAOIP was online, as I love innovation, and that's been my love since I graduated, I joined, and I said, well, we have to put this in Spanish, and then in French, and then, so that's going to be my last slide. In the meantime, I'm going to speak about one of the other ingredients of innovation. Methodologies, tools, people, that's great, but that's for large firms very interesting, because they have the spaces and they have the money. But what about small firms, which is what I've been doing all my life? I was one of those weird guys that graduated from an MBA in Wharton instead of investment banking in small business development. Can you believe it? What a waste of money. Actually, I didn't pay it. It was a Fulbright grant, but still. I was the only one to do small business development in 700-person class, and I'm still doing that 37 years later. And now I'm working and talking about Africa and innovation hubs and spaces in Africa, and how to measure. So it links up very much with the innovation standard, which I hope very soon it will come out, because I'm also former ISO 9000 certified chemical engineer. But as it's not there yet, I now center my attention on how to make innovation happen through what we need as small companies. We need hubs, spaces, locations, call it as you will, and that's what I'm going to. But I'm going to focus it in Africa. I've actually worked more in Latin America and probably Eastern Europe. When Yeltsin went on the tank, I did like 100 projects in Central Eastern Europe and Central Asia. But I'm going to focus in Africa, because what I put there in the yellow, disruption, is going to be what I think is the biggest disruption for our kids and our grandchildren. And this is Africa. Why? Well, who hasn't been disrupted by China? Don't raise your hand, because if you raise it, it means you haven't looked enough. Because your industry for sure has been disrupted by China, right? In the last 15 years, 10 years? Okay, well, who's going to be disrupted by Africa in the next, let's say, 25 years? Everybody. Why? I don't have one slide here to show that Africa is going to go from 1.2 billion people to 2.5 billion people in 2050. That's when my son is all of 45 years. And those 2.5 billion people, they're going to be 15 years of age, right? On average. Well, Japan is about, what, 60? Something like that. And so, 2.5 people which are going to be hungry, looking for jobs. And that, not only that, in 2100, if we don't have a China policy of one kid or I cut your whatever, they're going to be 4 billion people. Okay, and that's going to be about 40% of the population. And about 3 billion of those 4 billion people are going to try to jump the 11 kilometers of the Strait of Gibraltar and go to Spain, through the south of Spain, Italy, France, and some may come to the US, but you don't get a lot, So there's going to be an enormous challenge of how to employ these people and how to have a job. And then there's another situation. I mean, with the mobile phone penetration, some of these countries are actually doing some disruptive innovation at a small scale, for example, in payments, in fintech, and other places. I mean, there is innovation in Africa. You just don't know it because maybe you haven't been there enough. But there is some, but it's an adaptable innovation. It's a frugal innovation, if you will. It's a kind of frugal innovation. But to make that happen, you need the methodologies, you need this, but you need also the spaces. So let's start with the spaces. If this go ahead like that? Oh, sorry, yes, back. Okay, so innovation hubs and spaces. What I define as innovation hubs and spaces are anything that is a location. Okay, I'm excluding virtual hubs. Okay, so I'm including anything that is a space, meaning from the largest technology city or district a la Silicon Valley, as our former speaker, which there are very few, but there are a lot of projects to do, small Silicon Valleys, to an innovation district or innovation area, to an innovation park, to a science or research park, as you call it in the US, to something a little bit lower, called an innovation center, to something even smaller, called a business incubator, to something which has spun out of an industry incubator called accelerator, fab lab, maker space, co-working center. That's more than just an office, a shared hot desk. Okay, all these are spaces. Okay, and some of these spaces do manage to become hubs. Okay, so all this is what I'm talking about. Okay, and I'm centering on Africa, although I could do it for Latin America, where I've been in Guatemala for the last 6-9 months. But I think Africa is our biggest challenge for, let's say, as humans, not even as innovation professional. Okay, the problem is there's a lot of projects and there's a lot of money being spent by donors, African governments and other institutions that want to spend money, okay? And they're building villages. The Saudis and the Kuwaitis, they're building whole cities, right? Okay, Masdar, village, district, here you go, 500,000 near Dubai, 500,000 in Cairo. Okay, below that you have innovation districts or innovation areas, as they call it officially in the International Association. Okay, like Barcelona 22 district. If you've been to Barcelona, well, they have this area, which is a former forum, and it's a district that is pretty dispersed with innovative companies. Then below that you have centers, and then the parks. Okay, the parks, which are very popular or were very popular in the 80s and 90s. And they're very versions, right? Science Park, Science and Technology Park. STP is the official word of the International Association, which, funny enough, sits in south of Spain, in Malaga, but it has 400 parks. In the US, we have another one called IAOIP, Association of University Research Parks. And then in Korea, there's a third one, which sort of federates the Asian parks in itself and Seoul's WTA, okay? For those of you who don't know it. Incubators, well, there's thousands of incubators, right? Incubation Association. I've been doing incubators since I participated in the first incubator in Philadelphia with the Small Business Development Center there, because I was a trainee there as a Wharton MBA. And then after that, they spun us as accelerators with the Silicon Valley model, then fab labs, maker spaces. I can do a robot, I can do a drone. So then these things became popular. And then co-working started springing as business centers, right? And then some of them started doing networking and trying to become innovation hubs. For example, Collective, which is a co-working in Istanbul, it's a co-working, but it's everything. All the angel investors, all the venture capital, it's actually the hub of Istanbul, which is a 14 million people city, and it's the hub for entrepreneurs. So co-workings also have to be included, okay? And then we have the problems, the challenges. Well, I was in Burkina Faso. They told me, do a feasibility plan for a science park, Technopole in Francais. And I said, but where do I get the data? Well, we don't have demographic data. Where do I get the number of companies? We don't have companies. We don't even have a register of companies. 90% of the population is informal. So how do you do projections when you have this lack of data? I mean, Burkina Faso or Guatemala, where I was before, is a luxury of data compared to Burkina Faso, and a luxury also of infrastructure and of innovators and of education. So my point is everything is relative, right? So I said, okay, well, we don't have that. By the way, how do I commercialize the product? If it's a digital product, fine. Okay, if it's a Amazon-style product, or you can put it in some kind of electronic shape, fine. But what if it's not? I mean, I have all these restrictions of trade and this and that, and you're in West Africa, but you're not in West Africa because you're in Uamoa, which is a region of West Africa, and they have all these. So at the end, you know, you have a lot of problems in delivering your outputs, even if you produce good things. And then there's always this issue of, okay, everybody wants to be Silicon Valley and do digital products, but 90% of the economy is agriculture and food and basic goods. So, you know, so why don't we do first agri-tech and food tech, and then, you know, look at IT a little bit later, you know? Don't put the, but we want to have IT systems. So everybody's creating IT cyber parks, and that's not exactly what they're economy is doing. So sometimes they create these kind of isolated monsters, cities, etc. So I will give you a few examples now. And then this implies that an ongoing measurement, okay, of these hubs and spaces, which is a very difficult issue. If it's difficult to measure it in Coca-Cola, where you do have all kinds of data and so on, or how their innovation process is doing, imagine how would you measure the effectiveness and impact and efficiency of an innovation hub in Burkina Faso, Tanzania, or even in Tunisia, El Ghazala Park, the first one in the north of Tunisia, which I participated already 25 years ago. Okay, how do you measure that impact? Well, you have to do something, right? You have to use instruments. So that's the challenge, and that's what I'm going to do. So let's go on with what there is. For those of you who haven't been too much to Africa, I'll give you a very brief rundown of what's on there in innovation hubs and spaces, okay? First of all, they're building technology parks everywhere, technopoles in French, or that's a similar thing, okay? So there's like 30. Beyond technology parks, they're building technology villages, okay? Like in Cairo, sometimes they call it science villages, sometimes they call it technology cities, sometimes they call it whatever, smart cities, but smart cities is a different thing. And eventually, the objective is to turn into a smart city. Then below that, the parks usually include a business incubator, a business innovation center, and technology centers or technology transfer centers or something. Sometimes they call it centre d'excellence or something similar to technology transfer for SMEs. And sometimes multinationals come in there and they start with their own, let's call it regional innovation hub. Orange Telecom for Central Africa puts their infrastructure for you know, telecoms and IT, and then, of course, they want to get business. And sometimes they do innovation labs, too. I mean, they might situate an innovation lab. Okay, so then, essentially, a business park is a larger incubator. I actually do the same kind of business model, which is approved by UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Organization. I developed it with them in the 1990s. And an American guy from New York who's now retired, a guru in incubators. Then we made another model on in technology and science parks, and that's what we're using now as a standard. It's accepted by the EU, and normally the World Bank too uses this kind of model. Yes. 2 minutes left, okay. So business incubators, you know that. Okay, what is there? Look, this is just a sample of the technology parks in Botswana, in Kenya, in Namibia, Nigeria, and I have a database of these parks, and I also have it for incubators. I do not try to even do it for co-working centers or innovation labs. It's just too much. Quickly, challenges in defining. Well, there's many things to measure. Some are extremely difficult to measure. Okay, obviously, we can measure a lot of things, but are they the right ones? And this is the typical spigot. There's an international association of, as I said, that has 400 parks. They give guidelines, okay? And then we have the Oslo Manual, as we said, and then in the future, the ISO. Okay, so that all helps in building these frameworks, okay? And there's a number of, those of you who want some more material on this stuff, whether Africa or another emerging markets, please come to me. And I'm going to be here the full 2 days, even Thursday. You know, I can give you a lot of other things. Lessons learned, I will go very fast. You can read it later, but essentially there are some advantages. You got a lot of land, governments are involved, and a lot of disadvantages. There's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Everybody, the EU, the USAID, Millennium Challenge, they all want to fund parks, yeah, but they don't want to do white elephants. Okay, so that's another challenge. Methods, KPIs, the traditional, you know, key performance indicators, which is a pyramid or something. Balance a scorecard in some of its versions, first, second, third generation, used in the private sector. Results-based management, which is a kind of public sector, output-oriented, and logical framework and other types of popular methods. And then finally, IT tools to develop this. Very quickly, first you got to do the outcomes and the impacts. Okay, this is a potential selection. Then after that, you have to choose what to do, whether to use just the KPIs, of which we have our model, Tested Corporate Solutions, which is my company, Madrid. I'm the owner of the Madrid-based, Spain-based company, has its own model, which is a mix of goodies from Balance the Scorecard and Oslo Manual. I will shift it when the ISO comes out, okay? And I then adapt it. If it's an innovation center in Kenya, then I will adapt it to each specific project for which we're hired as consultants, usually with these public funds. More sophisticated but sometimes complex method is to use a balanced scorecard. Balanced scorecard, for those of you who are not up to date, it's not Norton and Kaplan anymore of the 1990s, but now it's evolved into second generation and third generation with strategic maps and outcomes oriented. I won't go into this, but you can use it. Maybe in Saudi Arabia and other countries and Kuwait, it doesn't work in Africa. It's too complex. They like the same, but what's the tangibles? What are the indicators? It's a bit too airy for them. Finally, results-based management is a must if you have public funds, or logical framework, which they're related, okay? And if you don't know these methods in the public sector, don't worry. You won't use them very much in the private sector, although they're quite good. They're outcome-oriented methods to look at your impacts. Okay, other popular methods, the logical framework is the traditional invented by USAID in the 1950s, still used by the EU and by other donors worldwide. Okay, and then we have specific, like this guy, who I like very much, a Finnish guy called Hub Concepts. He's a kind of Morris Langdon, but in Finland. And he has his own model of ecosystem. And I like him. I use it with his permission. And it's a very complete ecosystem, which is beyond me. Okay, I'm a meso level, and he's at a macro level, if you know a bit about economics. Okay, and then finally, the IT tools. Okay, for BSc, our UK office is called 2GC, which is like me. We have different names. We all use the brand 10-Step. Okay, but 2GC has a lot of materials on IT tools in Balance the Scorecard, so just go to that website and just look at the Balance Scorecard IT tools. He also has lots of things on performance management for the private sector and can update you on Balance the Scorecard, okay, to 2019 and compare that with RBM and all that. So you have all that. Other stuff, you can use ERP, you can use SharePoint, you can use whatever. I've even used project management solutions for portfolio management for building these models. It doesn't really matter at the end. The important thing is what to measure, how to measure, and what to spend in measuring this, right? And finally, right, that's my email, and I'm going to be here. And I could do the same instead of Africa and Latin America, so if you're interested, los españoles, pues que hablen español, que me contacten. Si vous êtes francophone aussi, ça me plairait de vous parler. And I'm going to spend 2 minutes on languages, okay? Well, I'm working with the IAOIP board here to try to put this into languages, so we created about 6 months ago a Spanish-speaking group, and Brett was just nice to give me the opening to say, okay, I'll coordinate a group. So I tried recruiting with IAOIP Web, somebody from the south of Uruguay in this case, Argentina, and I didn't know you. So we have an Uruguayan, 2 Guatemalas, a Costa Rican, we have a Peruvian, and a Spaniard. And with all these Spanishes, and a Mexican. With all these Spanishes, we created a version of the Spanish certification guide for management, for professional, the design guide, and the glossary, which was a big challenge. How do you translate diversity trumps and not using the word Trump in Spanish or in French? Right, so that's done. Of course, it's a working process, so anybody can download those documents. I think Brett and IAOIP is gonna upload them. I think they're decent. And also they're consensual. Like I did it before with ISO 21500. I was in the working group to adapt the 21000, which, if you know, it is the project management guidelines standard. And so we had the same situation. I was also in PMI, translating the PMI body of knowledge in version 4. So I know what these groups are. Thank God AIOP is very small. That's why I came here. We were 20,000 translators in the Spanish group. Now here we're only 7, okay? But you're welcome to show comments. There is a French group that is headed by a Tunisian, our company in Tunisia, which are French native speakers, and by a French lady. There's a Portuguese group by one of the members, Fernando Almeida, a professor from Lisbon, and a Brazilian, of course, 2 Brazilians, okay? And that's about 90% finished, and it's taking the Spanish version because it's so close, right? Then there's 2 working groups that are trying to emerge into Italian and Turkish, but it's difficult to get people to volunteer for free. Arabic is already translated voluntarily by a guy from Saudi Arabia. So, and the next I would say is Russian and Chinese, Mandarin. And then, probably I'll leave that to somebody else, although I speak a bit Russian, but I think there's other volunteers who can do a better job. And then I think the next challenge is to get the exams. And I think that's something that the board is going to consider. And I'm happy to have the same group translate the exam. We do have to sign confidentiality agreements so that eventually you can take the exam in Spanish or in French or one of the major languages. This is starting. I think the board is happy that I sort of push this because I believe in it, and not because I'm Spanish. I mean, it's because I think that AIOP to internationalize has to really speak at least 7 or 8 major languages. Otherwise, we all resort back to English if we have to, as happens in ISO. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry it took a little bit more time, but I had 2 topics on the subject, and I'm happy to take questions and coordinate and network on any of these 2 topics, spaces and translations.